Okay, my pleasure then to welcome everybody to this meeting of the Child and Family Services Scrutiny Performance Panel. It's nice to see everybody as usual. And Elliot's in as well, so a warm welcome to you, Elliot, as well as Julie, obviously. I didn't see you come in then, I apologise, but good to see you. And I'll take, if we have any, apologies for absence, please, Liz.
We've received apologies from Erica Kushner.
Okay, thank you, Liz. Item 2 on the agenda is disclosures of personal prejudicial interest. Anybody want to declare any interest at this stage, please? Okay, doesn't seem to be, so that's fine. Item 3 is a prohibition of whip votes and declaration of party whips. And item 4 is the minutes of the previous meeting. You've had those minutes, I'm sure. You've had a good chance to have a look through them. I don't know if there's anything in there that is of concern to you that you want to raise. If not, would somebody like to propose they be accepted? Thank you, Mike. Seconder, Wendy, by the looks of things. And if everybody's happy with that, can you just put your hand up and show us, please? Okay, thank you. Obviously, there's quite a bit in the performance highlights in that those minutes, but obviously, as it's on the agenda again, I'm sure any questions you might have then will be cleared up at that point in time, I think. Item 5 is public question time. Have we any, Liz?
No, we haven't received any, Chair.
Don't get many questions floating around these days. But we never used to get a lot on this committee anyway. But item 6 is performance highlights report and emergency staffing plan. And we've had the new sort of truncated, I suppose we better call it, extremely truncated report from Julie in that sense in terms of the service highlights and the page behind it. Not a lot for us to really get our teeth into in many ways. I know I was saying at the service improvement and finance scrutiny performance meeting the other day, because we were looking across council performance, the concerns that we've had from a scrutiny point of view in terms of being able to do scrutiny as to the depth that we would normally like to, but basically because of the installation of the WCCIS system. I hope I got that right, Julie, those initials, there or thereabouts anyway, WICIS, whatever. And having said that, I did say to the panel at that time, the performance panel, that whilst we had our concerns from a scrutiny point of view, we were even more concerned from an operational point of view for the department itself, because it obviously makes life very difficult when they're not getting the normal schedules of assessments and visits that need to be made, and you have to keep manual records to make sure that they're done on time, etc. So appreciate the problems that you've got with that, Julie. I don't know, perhaps you'd like to take us through what we have got and we can ask some questions from there. Okay, thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So just to start to say that we remain hopeful that we can bring to you the fuller report for February. So it is literally fingers crossed, because as Paxton said, the IT system is still not without its challenges, but we are still endeavouring to be able to go back to the former report that we used to bring that provides a lot more detail and analysis. But in the meantime, we're focusing in terms of the highlight report on what we see as the core areas that will provide us with some assurance that the service continues to deliver a safe, that is safe and effective, that we're delivering. So I'll go through the points that are on the second page, so that you can see that the overall numbers in the service that are supported are not too different from the previous month overall across Child and Family Services. Although we do have more families that are currently being supported through our early help hubs, which is positive. And I think from our point of view, although when we go back to the fuller report, we're going to include some what we call qualitative information from audits, but what our view is that that's indicative of the early help hubs doing a more proactive in their approach, have been engaging with schools more directly, been able to go into schools. and we've got a really good relationship between the front door and our early help hub, so families are signposted more swiftly and in a more streamlined way. But we'll keep an eye on that as a trend, and when you get the fuller report, you'll be able to see the trends then and look back over a longer period of time than just the previous month. So that's really pleasing for us and positive. In terms of contacts, that went down, but that's not surprising for December, because 2 weeks it was quite quiet because of Christmas. I've seen early data for January, and it's already going. It started on an upward trend again, as we would expect, back to the numbers that we perhaps saw in November. We see again the numbers that are closed to the service is still relatively high. And that is a positive sign, because that means the throughput in terms of cases moving on is in line with what we would expect. And therefore there aren't drifts and delays in case management and making contact with families and progressing their plans. And we've had a reduction in the number of single assessments. So this is an indicator that we have that keeps an eye on also throughput, but also demand in the service. So what we found with a system issue is that we had a higher number previously, but we had a bit of a system, not a blip, but because we weren't ticking the right boxes in WICIS, because it's new. So we went in with some support from the Learning and Improvement team, and because of that, that's had a positive impact on the number of single assessments in the system, because we were able to go in and remedy some system challenges. They weren't practice or management oversight challenges, it was just about familiarity with the system. It's good to see, and I think this is one of the things I said about WICIS, it probably will be the one positive thing that will remain, is that we can more readily evidence direct work through that system that we're undertaking with children and families. So that continues to be at a healthy rate. Child protection registration numbers as remains at 200, which remains to be considerably lower, and is more in line where we should be in terms of our indices and compared to other local authorities in Wales. But we have had continue to have a higher number of children registered at birth. So what we are seeing in Swansea at the moment is more unborns that we're worried about in circumstances that give us cause for concern. So that has led to more children going that are then ready to be registered at birth. And that's something that continues to be on an upward trend. The early signs for January are similar. The next point about the noticeable number of days reduction by 100 is quite significant. The numbers of the children on the register. So we're doing some analysis of that. We do know that some of that is because we did have a couple of quite large families that have been on the register for over a year, and they have now moved on. But we are just going to do some analysis of that to be assured that, and this is something that our Learning and Improvement team does, that we're assured that we're still maintaining strong thresholds and that children are moving on in the right way. Good improvements in a core group timeliness. So then that means that children on the register, their plans are being monitored on a regular basis with all partner agency input. You can see that's almost a doubling of where we were in November. And high levels of child protection statutory visits on time or not overdue. We do still, so I would expect that to be more in the mid-90s. But from where we were in the previous month, which was about half of that, we do still face some challenges with some social workers recording this in a timely way. So we can see from evidence they've given us and on a look back that the visits have happened, but they're not registering them on the system, the manual system we have, soon enough. So that's something that we're continuing to put some targeted support in, and I'm hopeful that will be back to where it needs to be through that additional support. Looked after children continues to be on a downward trajectory for Swansea. So our approach to supporting families for their children to remain living with them, their parents or the wider family, and also looking at discharging care orders through positive use of special guardianship orders continues to be a good approach for us, and more importantly for children and families. And the numbers coming in and out of care isn't of any cause for concern. So I think our forward-looking trajectory in terms of looked after children, I think we'll see Swansea still in relation to Welsh Government expectations. We're in a strong position, but most importantly, we're taking the right action in partnership with families to maintain children living at home where it's safe to do so. On child protection conferences, I checked back in with the principal officer, and I can confirm that all of those that were held on time, and there were no reviews or conferences that were out of time. That was, I just went to double check that. I saw that wasn't in the commentary, and that's through our manual tracking. I'm able to confirm that. Because if any conferences or child looked after children reviews are looking likely to be out of time, we've got a manual escalation process, so we have some immediate oversight of that. Family support services, which is our Edge of Care team, our Flexi and home support team, our Reflect project, our internal therapy service, it all sits in one area. We started to report on how many cases and how many families they're working with. It's just, as you can see, is a high number, and I think that's a good positive indicator of our drive to prevent children needing statutory interventions by working with families in a holistic way, and they continue to achieve good outcomes. Youth Justice Service remains steady in its approach and the way it's running its service, and we'll plan to bring to you in a future meeting, hopefully March, the full report from the full inspection that was undertaken towards the end of last year. We'll bring that here once we've received that and it's been formally published. And so that's I think overall that presents, hopefully you can see a positive picture in terms of what I can bring to you at this stage based on the overall performance of the service. I hope that offers a level of assurance for you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Julie. On that basis, I'll throw the meeting open to anybody who wants to ask any questions. I notice, Mike, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Sorry for my lateness. I was a little bit late coming to the meeting. Thank you very much, Julie. I think I mentioned some time ago now, or maybe 2 years ago or something, whether we need to have such detailed performance reports. So I can understand that we'll have more detail in February, but I think that the detail that you've given us there feels solid, particularly in the context of safeguarding. And can I say how heartened it is for me to, and of course we're never complacent, and I'm certainly not thinking complacency when I'm saying this, but when we see so many cases being closed, that every one of those is a great success story for vulnerable families and their children. The number of days of children and young people on the child protection register, one question relating to that, would that indicate to you a more, I don't know how to put it really, a more kind of driven, proactive approach to support the families so they're not on the child protection register any longer than they should be? And again, seeing the looked after children number going down, and incredibly no reviews or conferences out of time. So this is taking a timely response. So under all the pressures, this seems to me to be very strong in the context of safeguarding. So can I ask Julie about the number of days on the CPR? Would you say that is as I'm sort of translating it?
Yeah, yes, Mike, that's exactly as it should be. So children shouldn't be on the register for too short a period of time, because you would question whether they should have stepped into the statutory intervention. So had we thoroughly enough assessed and safety planned with the family before thinking they should go to initial conference. And similarly, they shouldn't be on normally shouldn't be on the register for much longer than 12 to 18 months, because we should be progressing things with the family to step down, or if we're not able to achieve sustainable change and the likelihood of the change is very low, then we should be looking to step up and thinking about going into public law outline and thinking about whether we need to put the matter before court. So it is about the robustness of the plans, as you quite rightly say, and the timeliness of our responses to the progress or otherwise of children that are on the register. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you, Julie.
Okay, thanks, Julie. Yvonne, and then Mike.
Sorry, Chair. I couldn't get in. Okay, so Julie, thanks very much for the report, but I've got a couple of questions, and I want to say here they are just questions. Okay, so one of the things you mentioned was that there is an increase of pre-birth being looked at or being taken into care. Is that correct? And I was just wondering how much, especially if the mother has already got children who are in care for whatever reason, there's a new baby coming along, and so that's looked at to be taken as well. How much explanation is given to mum? That's my question. How much? Only because I'm asking this question, I've given an answer, but it's a question that I've been asked recently by a couple of families.
Happy Ms. Corinne, Chair?
Yes.
Yes.
So the report refers to children unborns that have gone on the Child Protection Register, not necessarily come into our care. So some of those may come into our care, but not necessarily so. So what we would endeavour to do with all parents, where even whether they've had a child previously on the register or come into our care, is to work with them and think about what we could do differently based on their lived experiences previously and what their circumstances now. So, for example, if they were previously in a domestically violent relationship, but they're not now, their mom's circumstances are very different. So our focus is always about looking for the hope and the positives and taking a strengths-based approach and working with the parents and looking how we can offer support and interventions. So, for example, if one of the challenges for either parent or both is around alcohol or substances, then we call upon other agencies to look at how we could work with the parents. So everything's predicated on working with and alongside mom and dad, if dad's on the scene, or both parents, to work with them to enable the baby to stay within the family unit. So it's never about, we don't automatically assume that because there's one baby being removed, that this time also that's what will happen, because we always think and look at the circumstances now and what we may be able to do differently with parents this time around, if that's the case. But so we look at every case it's an individual view on that case with other agencies and with parents and the wider family.
Okay, sorry, Chair, can I?
Yes, of course.
Okay. I understand, and obviously that's been explained before, and I understand all of that. But if it's a case where the new baby, it isn't perhaps, or maybe is going to be taken into care, but mum doesn't seem to fully appreciate why. At least that's what she's saying. So I was just, in a sense, looking reassurance that although I feel over the years, I feel quite comfortable that that's what happens, but that it's explained to mum in every which way why it's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the what a number of things that we will look at is whether mom would like her own advocate. Okay. So that's one thing we would look at and not make that offer. We would consider whether how ways we can help mom to understand what we're saying. So whether they use different forms of communication with the parent. So we do try, and whether the social worker is the best person to do that. So could that be through the advocate or somebody else? And then we've had some really nice examples recently where we've gone to, for example, integrated autism service that works with adults diagnosed and undiagnosed, and help sort their expert input to make sure that we've not missed anything. So we try different ways to help the adults that are part of that child's life to understand what's happening and what's occurring and what they may be able to do to support any change.
Okay, thanks very much. Last question. Did you say they're offered an advocate?
Yes.
Okay.
And we have a commission service that we can call upon. Mm-hmm. But obviously it's their choice whether but certainly we make that offer. Yeah. And children that are on the register, although obviously this wouldn't be very helpful for a newly born, but we have an active offer of advocacy as well for children on the register and those that are looked after when they reach a certain age.
Thanks very much, Julie. Thanks, Chair.
It sounds like, Yvonne, that you've got a specific case in mind there. I'm sure Julie would be quite happy if you contacted the department separately outside the meeting, I think.
Okay, thanks. But I feel Julie has confirmed what I said and
Okay,
what I
fine.
sort of thought was happening. Thanks both.
Okay, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Paxton. Thanks, Julie, for the report. Just going back to the minutes of the previous meeting, there was mention made of the CFS workforce details being sent through. Apologies if I've missed it. I don't know if others may have had it, but it would be interesting to get that. And just a couple of questions on the back of that. First of all is, in terms of support for refugee and asylum seeker families, is there any kind of special provision that's made? I know that in the education scrutiny panel, one of the concerns we've got is that many of these families might come to a place temporarily and then move to a different part of the city for more permanent location, and being able to kind of track and follow those through is sometimes a difficulty. But just thinking in terms of, so what is the support mechanism for asylum seeker and refugee families, and whether that's a particular issue for you, Julie. And just related to that is that the agenda item is talking about the kind of the staffing plan. So on the basis of the CFS workforce, we may not be able to detect many changes from month to month, but it would be useful perhaps in our next meeting to have an update as to how things are going. Has recruitment changed? Are there any other mechanisms or support provided to attract new staff in? So it's two sets of sections really. One would be related to refugee and asylum seeker families, and the second then would be to look at next time at the how the staffing plan is going.
So I think, Mike, that obviously what you say in terms of asylum seekers, that's a separate issue. But in terms of the staffing plan as we have it at the moment, obviously there was a lot of comment about it at the last meeting. It's reflected to a degree in the minutes, and I suspect that hopefully Julie's going to come back and say a little bit more about it now, because it's on the agenda for today anyway. So hopefully those will answer the questions you got. Am I right, Julie? Is that the situation? Okay. Sorry
if I've preempted your comments, Julie.
Yeah, so I'll pick up the points about workforce when I give the verbal update. But on the asylum seeker and refugee, then if we're contacted in terms of support and services, we do hook into the council's refugee services as well. So we're aware of community-based support. So whether it's statutory threshold or it's early help, then we do work together with other council services and local services to to offer the right support to families that we're aware of, taking a broader community-based approach.
Okay, before we go off this section, I think Mike has already said, Mike Dirk, how impressive some of the figures are in respect of the Child Protection Register, and certainly the way the numbers of looked after children have been reducing. I certainly have been surprised with the rate at which those have come down myself, and obviously it's a credit to the department. There must be some bit of concern in terms of that, in terms of making sure that children are safe. And in terms of Child Protection Register, one of the figures we used to get quite easily and quite regularly was the amount of re-referrals. Are you satisfied that in terms of those re-referrals and re-registrations that they're still comparatively low?
Yes, I'm satisfied that they're still comparatively low. I would say that on the looked after children numbers, when we can bring the trend data to you in the terms of children in and out and how long they're in care for, what we're using the public law outline process for really well is if we have a period of assessment where, for example, the child might go into a mother and or parents and baby placement, that they may be looked after for a short period of time, but then they return home. So what I'm hoping that you'll see when we can pull the trend data off is we might have a higher number of children that are in care for a shorter period of time, but they then go successfully return home. So that's part of the looked after children population. In terms of child protection, yeah, we do, through our weekly safeguarding meetings, we dip sample those children that go on the register and come off the register to exactly look at what you just described in terms of how long they've been on for, whether it's a repeat registration or a repeat referral come in. So we pick up quickly any concerns and go and have those conversations to see whether the right decisions were made, and if not, we can then follow that up. And that has only happened once that I'm aware of late, where we've gone back and had a look and thought maybe that wasn't the right decision for that family, but it was acted upon quickly, and children are confident to be appropriately safeguarded through that registration looked after children process.
Well, I think that's comforting, so thank you very much for that. Unless anybody's got any other questions in terms of performance, perhaps you'd like to give us an update now on the emergency staffing plan then, Julie, please.
Yeah, so as Mike said, I'm really hopeful that at future meetings I can bring you a broader brush view of staffing in terms of numbers, vacancies, turnover, etc. But so where we're at in terms of the staffing situation is that we continue to still have not recruited to the vacant social worker posts in the locality teams. We have had more success in the front door, where we don't have as high level of number of vacancies there. But we were successful in recruiting the support workers, so that in the locality teams, that's easing some of the pressure. But we still remain, and what we continue to do is from across the service to ensure that the key statutory duties are fulfilled. We pull in support from the front door, from Base Plus, and from the looked after children team, if we need to ensure that a visit happens on time, that it does so. And we continue to pull in independent social workers if we need a key assessment completing for court that we haven't got capacity within the team to do. So it's not bringing in agency workers, it's independent social workers to complete key tasks. So I would say that it still remains a concern, the ability to recruit social workers, permanent social workers, as it does across all of Wales. The key pressure that we're facing in the department at the moment that exacerbates the staffing challenge is that we are having a number of placement challenges, so either placement breakdowns, so that might be that particularly the impact of the COVID restrictions and people's ability to cope with the environment that the child's placed, or we've had similarly parents struggling, so children needing to come into our care either for a short period of time or for a longer period of time, and there just aren't sufficient placements in Wales, let alone in Swansea. And so we are finding that two things are occurring. One is we're having to use a lot of our own staff to provide care and support for children in what Care and Support Wales call an unregulated placement. So for instance in Refugee, just to try and until we can find a placement for them. So we're using a lot of in-house staff to do that, rather than agency workers, some agency workers as well. But the other consequence of that, and you'll see this in future performance report, is that more children are being placed in England because there aren't the placements in Wales at the moment. So we're really, really struggling for both residential and fostering placements. So that's something that we're very mindful of, and we don't see that. There is one which is a very, very specialist placement, which may be for a little longer than we would normally have a child in. But in the main, we'll be looking to return children to Wales if and when placements become available. But part of the issue is that some providers, because of the Welsh Government initiative to eliminate profit from children's social care, are making the decision to either stop any future plans to move into Wales to develop placements, or they're deciding that actually they're not going to continue to offer placements to Welsh children. So we were already struggling across England and Wales in relation to being able to have enough placement offers, because fostering is our first choice if a child needs to come into our care because it's a home, a family environment. But that's a real challenge for us. That's putting an extra strain on the staffing across the whole of the service, and not just our locality teams. So we have the advert out. I'm hoping in the next report I can give you some feedback on the advert and the impact of the additional benefits that we're offering to social workers for the frontline teams. That closes this week, I think. We have brought in some additional fixed term 12-month contract staff to put into the edge of care type stuff, the Refugee type stuff. So when we have breakdowns, we can more readily call on staff to resource that. They were filled quite readily because they're not social worker posts, they don't need to be. And the workforce data, we've pulled that together, and I think that was due to be fed back from Elliot. I think tomorrow I think is probably the deadline, but that's all been pulled together, ready to go, and Elliot signed that off to give an overview. And the other thing that we have pursued since I reported last time was the working with our universities, so that where we're looking at newly qualified, we can get a more direct feed into the service to work on the lower level cases, so the more experienced workers can work on the more complex cases. So it remains an ongoing challenge and an ongoing worry in terms of availability of experienced and qualified social workers for Swansea.
In terms of fostering then, obviously we've done a lot of work in terms of Foster Swansea, or you've done a lot of work in terms of Foster Swansea and developing that, as opposed to the independent fostering companies. You're saying those independent companies are not looking to take on children now for fostering in Wales?
Yeah, it's some examples that so we're working collaboratively through 4Cs, which I think has been in place for some time in terms of so we have the formal framework by which the independent agencies, we go to that to source the independent providers, and some providers are stepping away from Wales because of the uncertainty about what this programme will mean in relation to the elimination of profit from children's residential care. So we do place children in neighbouring authorities, but also across Wales. But where there are less and less placements becoming available across Wales for fostering as well as residential. But what we're doing with Foster Wales and Foster Swansea Wales is looking at some more targeted campaigns. So we need more foster carers for teenagers and complex teenagers, picking up on the point about asylum seekers and refugees, with the national transfer scheme that the Home Office has mandated across all English and Welsh local authorities, whether we can go to some of these refugee communities, whether they may be interested in becoming foster carers. So that's another targeted campaign we're considering in the coming weeks, so that we can hopefully then recruit more foster carers for Swansea children and people.
Yeah, I think that was the next question in terms of, are we going to basically see if we can boost up the Foster Swansea successes again, I suppose, is the way I was going to put it. But I think you just about answered that question, or preempted the question, I should say, and as a result. Yeah, it obviously sounds like a concern, and when you have that situation, from what you're describing, it makes it even perhaps a little bit more surprising that you've been able to reduce the number of looked after children and the length of time children with a child protection register. I don't know whether you've got any comments on that.
I guess that all of that was in train before we faced the severe staffing challenges, because a lot of particularly the looked after children numbers were things that were particularly the court process can be quite lengthy. A lot of that is led by a looked after children team that haven't had the same staffing shortages. They have had some staffing challenges for absences due to COVID, but a lot of that work is led by, in the main, by a looked after children team. So that would be why that hasn't been impacted in the same way. We did a lot of targeted work in the last 12 months around particularly special guardianship orders, and I think we've that then led to quite a high number of children over a 6 to 9 month period before we hit the staffing crisis, going through that process to have the special guardianship orders granted and the care orders discharged.
With the current pandemic and Omicron, has that really impacted on you in the last month or so in terms of staff absence because of potential infection?
Not to the degree that we feared. We were able to, in terms of containing the service, so we were able to pull in other areas and keep the service safe and effective. So we weren't as badly. So we reactivated our COVID contingency plan, and we're all lined up to then reintroduce virtual working in various scenarios, starting from non-statutory, and then so therefore to protect the statutory side of the service. But in the event, we were able to manage without having to go into that area of reintroducing too much virtual working. Okay,
Mike, you wanted to come in? Mike Dirk?
Yeah, sorry, Chair. Yeah, very interesting. It is interesting. I'm always I share the concerns relating to residential childcare and unregulated placements, of course, is very concerning. And what it does to me is it makes me think about in the 1990s when we had a very consistent series of very high level investigations, where we saw some terrible abuses in with the most vulnerable children in Wales and other parts of the country. And of course, people, long-serving people will remember the high-level reports of people like Sir Ronald Waterhouse, Sir William Hutton throughout the 90s, Barbara Khan, and lots of others. And one of the things that I just would like to park and mention, I have mentioned before, is this, we've got fantastic social carers, fantastic residential carers, fantastic foster carers in Swansea. What we saw over the years was that some of our skilled knowledge and experience workers were poached by some of these independent care providers to set up private businesses for venture capitalists in different places. So the skills came from our front line and were profited upon by, the people who were charging councils fees. So what I think is, I mentioned before this idea of social enterprise and then reinvesting the profit into the education of looked after children. It's a good model. I wonder whether Welsh ministers are thinking along similar lines and helping us to fund this kind of much needed provision for our most vulnerable young people. I wonder whether that's in the mind of ministers somewhere, because it ought to be. We can't take any risks in this context, and I think perhaps that they have, maybe inadvertently, but they have.
Elliot, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, thank you, Paxton. I think it's a really interesting point that Mike makes around that, and there certainly is, people may be aware of Welsh Government's desire to remove profit from children's social care, which is, I think, an admirable aim to achieve, but of course it's something that is having an impact on us. But I think as a service, we're definitely looking forward at ways in which we can deliver things differently to meet some of these challenges, and how we can perhaps use some of that expertise that's available to us. But it's something, I think, for the longer term to look at some of that investment. But I think we'd all welcome some investment in that from Welsh Government, and hopefully that will come along with some of these aims to reduce the profit for private sector.
I think the only thing I would say to that, Elliot, was that if the department feels that they want some more extra support along this line, I'm sure Scrutiny would be prepared to write an appropriate letter if that's what you felt was appropriate, for a better way of putting it. Because obviously there must be concerns if we are struggling to find places, residential places, I guess, at this point in time. I'm not seeing any other hands up at this point in time. Anybody else want to ask any questions or make any comments? Okay, in that case, I'll say thank you very much to Julie and Elliot for that section. It's always interesting, that's for sure, but it is very important, and we understand the pressures that you're going through. As I said, Des will know full well that I mentioned the problems in terms of the computer system when we were looking at overall performance and the service improvement, overall council performance, I should say, through service improvement and finance scrutiny panel, and the lack of data as far as safeguarding was concerned, and expressed again the concerns we had from a departmental point of view of the computer system in terms of your operating systems for you to have available, rather than having to use manual systems, which is obviously taking up time and resources. I just say that at this point in time. Before I move on to item 7 on the work programme timetable, you've seen it before, you've got it in front of you. Obviously next month we are looking at the budget meeting. Effectively, we think it's going to be the 14th of February, but that will have to be confirmed. When we'll hold a joint social services scrutiny performance meeting with adult social services at the same time, and I'm sure we will have an update at that meeting on where we are with the pandemic at that point. So if anybody's got any questions on the work programme, or you can see the March programme as it is at the moment. That might change, but if it does, we'll keep you informed anyway. If there's anything that's more we think is a bigger priority, we'll bring it forward. So unless anybody's got any questions, I will say thank you very much to Elliot and Julie for the contributions today, and certainly the reports that we get. And thank you to everybody for the meeting. And I suppose have a good evening. I can't say Merry Christmas now or Happy New Year because that's already gone, isn't it? Okay, thank you very
Happy
much.
St. Doinans Day.
So, what?
Happy St. Doinans Day.
Please, mate.
Happy Valentine's, Paxton.
Yeah,
get it.
it's the Welsh Valentine. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.